Tom Davison from Davison Orchards. Yeah, originally the farm was mostly apples. There's 34 acres on the original farm, and there was some vegetable crops as well, but apples has always been kind of the main event. My dad was just 17 when his dad passed away when he was very young, and then his uncle passed away when he was 17. And at that point, he took over the farm, 17 years old. Yeah. So I always kind of get a kick out of people who don't understand the industry and they think you have, the winter to put your feet up or go south or something. No, there's always work on the farm, all the pruning that has to happen in the winter months, equipment maintenance, building maintenance, all of those things. And, when spring hits, things start fairly fast. Blossom is coming in early May. And that's really such a critical time for us. Well, temperatures are so important. Pollination is a huge issue with tree fruits, and particularly with apples and pears. The health of the pollinators, the number of pollinators, the activity of the pollinators is really the critical thing. And so people think about honeybees, of course, which are critical for pollination, but they're not the only pollinators. Every apple has to actually be cross-pollinated. An apple to grow, these are Golden Delicious where we are here, the bees actually have to move the pollen from another apple variety to this variety and mix it on the flower for that apple to be pollinated and begin to grow. Every apple actually has two parents. So when you go through an apple orchard, we have to have pollinators planted strategically through the block. We mix varieties, so we'll have 6 rows of one variety, Gala or Honeycrisp, and then 2 rows of Golden Delicious and 6 rows of something else. Then the pollinators hopefully don't have so far to move to actually do that process. People see dandelions everywhere in the orchard, and they wonder why you don't try to control the dandelions. Well, dandelions are actually fabulous for pulling the bees into the orchard. Bumblebees, wasps, there's over 100 bee species in this area. We want them to be in the habit of coming to our orchard. So we actually are very happy to have a huge bloom of dandelions. We try to make sure there's enough water available, freestanding water for bees, especially if it's hot during bloom. This area, because we're in the North Okanagan and we're on very steep slopes, we tend to have less frost problems than some places further south, which tend to be in bloom earlier. And if you're on flat ground, then you'll see wind machines and different things trying to alleviate the risk of frost. But bees, and again, honeybees are a little more fussy about moving when it's cold. So that's why I love the bumblebees and some of the wild bee species. They're actually a little more hardy, and they'll get out and pollinate when it's colder. So one of the first big jobs is actually fruit thinning. So once the fruit is set on the trees, then we are going through with a group of guys, a crew of people who are actually looking at the crop, and they're doing fruit thinning. We have about 65,000 apple trees, and what we're asking our guys to do is to go through and look at every apple on every tree, and then try to determine if there's any damage on that fruit, then remove it then. So the tree isn't putting its energy into low quality fruit. Partly it's to get the quality higher for the current year, but also relieving some of the crop load helps the return crop. So this year with the hail, we were often removing 30 to 40% of the fruit that was on the tree. There's a multitude of nutrition issues that go on right from pre-bloom right through the summer. Actual spraying that we do is actually to spray nutrients onto the trees to be absorbed through the leaves. We start in the spring early with zinc and boron, and then there's magnesium and sometimes a little more zinc. These are just nutrients the tree is in need of that we don't have in abundance in the area, but the root system is actually really inefficient at picking it up. And that's also variety sensitive, because not every variety has the same nutrient issues. So we're quite remote. We're actually on the northern fringe of tree fruit production. Like, this is it. If you look at a map of North America, put your finger on Vernon, that's the farthest north in North America where tree fruit and vineyards are grown commercially. We do get winter, so that actually eliminates a body of pests. We're very, very dry, which is huge for the disease side of it. So often in fruit growing areas, they're needing to control disease virtually every week. But we still have pest pressure. We still have some diseases that have to be controlled. When my dad was a young guy trying to grow apples, codling moth was a huge issue, probably the biggest pest issue. And now, we haven't sprayed for codling moth for a number of years because there's a program to eliminate moths in the whole valley. You know, there's sort of the range of leaf rollers, aphids, mites, clearwing moth and things, but again, we don't seem to have a lot of pressure for that in the North Okanagan. Yeah, no, we're always excited to get going with harvest, and again, we grow a lot of different apple varieties because we're marketing ourselves, so we have 20 different apple varieties. So we're starting apple harvest, you know, near the beginning of August. But by the time we get to September, then we're really full on with Honeycrisp is our #1 variety, Gala, and then into Ambrosia. Like right now, we're picking some stranger varieties like Mutsu, which is a fabulous apple. We have a lot of fun with growing some unique varieties. If they taste great, then we enjoy to grow them and to sell them in our market. The first apples came out of one of the stands, Kazakhstan, I believe. That area of the world was actually the first apples. And of course, we've been grafting, and because apples, you know, we talked about pollination and the fact that every apple actually has 2 parents because the pollen had to be moved. So what that means is that when you plant the seeds out in an apple, so we're in Golden Delicious, if you plant them seeds all out, what do you get back? Not Golden Delicious. In fact, you have no idea what you're going to get back. There was 2 parents, and it's just like our parents, they thought their kids might look a little bit like mom or dad, but they're not mom and dad. Every apple, if you plant the seeds out, every single seed is going to give you something slightly different, and it will have traits of the parents, but it will never be exactly the same. So the only way to propagate apples is by using grafting or budding. Every fruit tree is going to be grafted, or more common terminology is actually budding, because they literally on a shoot would, I don't know if we can see this, but it'll just be literally the bud at the base of the leaf. That's actually what they use to propagate in the nurseries. And if you look at an apple tree right at the ground level, you'll see a bit of a bulge. That's where the graft was made, in the nursery. So when we are going to plant an orchard, we actually start by choosing what kind of a root system we want, and then the variety. And the root system will dictate how big the trees get. So these Goldens are almost 20 years old, and I can still reach them from the ground. That's because of the root system we chose. It has to be the right winter hardiness and match the soil and the variety, and then you graft the variety onto the root system. To get a new variety is an incredibly difficult process, because all you can do is take 2 parents that you like, put them together, and then plant them out and see if the fruit that comes off the new planting is actually any better than the parents. This is done by places like the Summerland Research Station, places like Minnesota and Cornell in New York. They have apple breeding programs where they're looking to develop bigger and better apples. Like, you could spend your lifetime looking for a new apple variety and never find one. So Honeycrisp is, you know, people think it's new. Well, it is relatively new, but it's probably 30 years old or something in that range. Came out of the University of Minnesota, and they've had an apple breeding program there for probably 100 years or something. That's their first real success. You know, we talked about pruning, we talked about the thinning, and then the harvesting. So there's at least 3 trips where you're actually doing something by hand in the trees. So being able to control the size of apple trees with the right root systems and get a smaller tree with a smaller profile is hugely important for the efficiency of labor. Like I say, these are actually old trees here, but they still are quite narrow. Like, the sun is getting through into the tree in a very even way. So the quality here, we're not saying all the good ones are on the top. The whole tree is great. With a bigger, older tree, you actually grew the wood structure, because that was what, you know, you need a structure to hold your crop. And that took 7, 8, 9 years. And then they farmed them till they were terrible old 40-year-old things. And those trees, there was maybe 40 or 50 trees per acre. So with a new planting, we're planting about 2,000 trees per acre. With the dwarf root systems, they're actually so weak and so intent on cropping, they won't hold themselves up. So you just plant them, they'd have a crop and fall on the ground. So we have to have a structure to hold them up. So we use a trellis system for that. The tree is very narrow and very efficient, and there's very little wood production. So harvest, of course, is just a super intense time, because everything you've worked for 12 months comes down to those days of harvest. Everything is done by hand. You know, I talked about the family coming in the 20s. The only thing that is really exactly the same since the 20s is that apples are still picked by hand, one at a time, and put into a little picking bucket on guys' shoulders. It takes a lot of labor to get a apple crop off. Again, when I was a young guy growing up, everybody got paid per bin, and a bin holds about 800 pounds of apples. We switched away from that almost 10 years ago because the emphasis with that system is on speed. You know, we worked all year to get the apples to this stage. And for us, it's not about speed. It's about getting the crop off carefully, gently. Sure, you have to be efficient, and we got a lot of apples to pick, so there's speed is involved. So we just pay everybody by the hour. When I was a kid, I can just remember the days when things were literally ditch irrigated, where, you know, there was water in a flume up along the top of the orchard, and you were allowed so much water, and you ran ditches and you ran around with hose, if you can imagine, transformed into sprinkler irrigation with aluminum pipes. And we were, again, weaving around through the trees with aluminum pipes and changing them every morning and every night all summer long. We began using trickle irrigation, and that's really transformed irrigation and water management in a huge, huge way. The system is really designed to give the plant, whether it's a tomato plant or an apple tree, the water it needs for the day. Because now we're not watering the grass in between, we're only just watering right where the rows are. So it's just getting to the trees, not losing it through the profile, so you're not washing nutrients out of the profile. And now we're doing some work with row covers, and they're called hail nets, but they're actually a bit kind of a shade cloth. It protects the crop from hail, but it also reduces the water demand for the trees because it changes the climate underneath that net. And that really changes the climate. So there's less evapotranspiration from the crop, and so we're still playing with it. It's an experiment, which is fun. You know, the first immigrants that were coming in here recognized immediately the uniqueness of the area for agriculture. On the south side, on the U.S. border side, they also recognize the uniqueness of the climate for tree fruit production. So the industry there is massive because they have lots of land in the Columbia Basin and water out of the Columbia River. In our farm and for our tree fruits, and actually all of our vegetable crops as well, we do all of the processing ourselves. We want to sell direct to the customer. We make preserves, we make things like apple butter, and we have a bakery that's using, I don't know, they must peel 2,000 to 3,000 pounds of apples a week just for the bakery. The majority of the apples in the valley are taken to bigger packers who are going to, and again, the grower's responsibility then is actually much more limited because they don't even need to own their own bins. Typically, the packers provide you literally with the harvest bins. So your job then is to grow as good a quality as you can because that will improve your returns. And so they're going to grade the fruit and package it, and at that point it could be sent anywhere in the world. There's no tariffs, there's no quotas, it's a totally free trade. I mean, the fabulous thing about apples is that they're used in so many different ways. I think there's a lot of interest in apples. There's a lot of interest in good products. If you make a great applesauce or a great apple juice, there's great demand for it. We think there's a huge future. For us, we're just trying to keep up with it because apples is a slow process. If I decide today, I need to plant more Honeycrisp. So it's going to be 3 years in a nursery, and then we plant it in the orchard, and we don't actually allow it to have crops for 3 years because we need the tree to grow strong. If we take fruit off of it right away, it will crop like in the first year you plant it. But we actually go through and cut the blossoms off because we need the tree to put its energy into growing and filling the space, which typically takes 3 years. So this is a long-term game, and so we're planting and renewing our orchards every year. We put in new acreage and take out older trees. But I don't know. There's something about growing apples that gets in your blood. I just love it. People are always saying to me, are you sick of apples or whatever? I eat like 6 or 8 apples every day. I just love apples, and so it's a great way to make a living.